All right, so this week we are on to international foods. We're going to Peru. Okay, so um, the culinary history of Peruvian food goes back a long way, pre-Inca time, right? With things like corn and potatoes being there forever, and stuff like spices later being influenced during the arrival of the Spanish colonies, right? Also, through the years, it's incorporated foods from the large amounts of migrations that have come from people around the world to Peru. Such groups such as like the Chinese, the European, the Africans, and Japanese immigrants. Okay, for example, even something like Shifa style food, which is like a Peruvian Chinese fusion cuisine, originated from Chinese immigration to Peru. So we're gonna talk about that as well. Okay, when we look at the regional varieties of Peruvian cuisine, we're gonna see three big things. Okay, the coastal area, which is right next to the southern Pacific coast, right? That'll tell us some things. The Andes mountain region, which is huge, right? And then basically to the east of the Andes mountain, for the Andes mountain range, is mostly Amazon rainforest. Okay, so we'll focus on those three regions as well as some of the fusion cuisine that comes from it. If we look here on the left, you'll see population density. So in the capital city of Peru or Lima, there is the highest amount of population density there. So the coastal regions seem to have a lot of people. And as you go into the Andes mountain range and the Amazon rainforest, you're going to find less people there. Okay, so maybe on the coast, we'll see more modern technique and more influence from immigration, and maybe in the mountain range and the rainforest, we're going to see more rural things and classic hearth cookery and heritage traditional cooking techniques. Okay, so let's go through some notable ingredients. The first one and the most notable thing about Peruvian indigenous ingredients are potatoes. There are many varieties of potatoes that comes from the Andes Mountains. Actually, 99% of the world's potatoes are direct descendants of a type of potato that comes from the Andes Mountains. So uh, it's really developed into thousands of different varieties. You can see them all here over time, and we'll see lots of tubers being used. Tubers meaning root vegetables that grow underground, similarly made up like a potato. Okay. There's lots of different shapes, sizes, colors, flavor profiles. There's waxy potatoes, there's sweet potatoes, there's high starch potatoes, high moisture potatoes. But there are a ton of different types of tubers in Peruvian cuisine, and we're going to see that all across the board. Okay, other one is maize, corn. And there are many different varieties of corn as well, all across the Americas. In Peru, there's just as many variety. Some corn have large kernels and are incredibly starchy. This is like the main type of corn you're going to see in Peruvian cuisine is the one with the big kernels, really starchy. But you also see like heirloom varieties with different starch contents, lots of different colors, sometimes ground into flour, sometimes just steamed whole, right? Based on the type of corn, it may be used for, it may be suitable for human consumption just from simple cooking, or you can grind it into a flour. Or some corns might need a process called nixtamalization, right? And this is not as big in Peru as it might be in like Mexico, obviously, but maize nixtamalizados or hominy basically is corn that has gone through the nixtamal process. And that's a process where kernels of corn are soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, usually like lime water, um, in order to soften the grain, right? There are many benefits to nixtamalizing corn, such as the corn being more easily ground. It can be turned into masa a lot easier. The nutritional value will increase, and the flavor and aroma can also improve based on the type of corn that you use. So, nixtamalized corn can be left whole as hominy, or it can be ground into masa, which is used to make tortillas in like Mexican cuisine, right? This is not, again, as prevalent as we'll see it in other American cultures, but it is something to be considered because they do it in Peru as well. Okay. Other grains and starches. Quinoa is a big one. So it's an ancient grain from the amaranth family, and a lot of the amaranth plants are in this kind of this plant looking type thing where it grows straight up and then you see all the little seeds and grains straight up on that stem. Okay, so quinoa is cooked somewhat similar to rice and is served as a staple grain in Peruvian food. Quinoa originated from the Andes mountain range, and really it's now like a health food across the world. So we definitely know it in America, and people eat it all across the world. And we'll see a lot of these like ancient grains, things like quinoa, caniwa, and all the types of amaranth are used as like health foods, like and quite expensive. But really, it's from humble beginnings coming from the Andes mountain range. And another type of this plant is caniwa, right? Looks pretty similar, but it's like red. When it's dried, it's brown or pretty dark brown. And it's another type of ancient grain originating from the Andes mountain range, very similar to quinoa. You could probably find this in a health food store somewhere around here for an extraordinarily high price. But again, humble beginnings coming from the Andes mountain range, indigenous plant to Peru. Okay, okay. So tarwi is a type of legume grown in the Andes mountain range with an edible bean. It's a nutrient dense legume that is high in protein and also great for making cooking oil. So tarwi is like a bean, right? And there's lots of different types of beans we'll find in Peruvian food. Like those grains are a big thing, the beans are a big thing, corn and potatoes are like the four main food groups of like starches that we're going to find out there. Again, very nutrient dense. Really pretty flowers, right? But you see those little pods, those are where the beans come from. They can be cooked just like this, or they can be turned into oil because they're high in fat. Lima beans, right? So it's a legume with a large bean originating from the western side of the Andes. It's a pole bean, right? So it grows straight up. Um, it goes straight up like on vines kind of, and then you'll see these flowers will sprout and then the pods will come out as well. Okay. While the bean is named after the capital of Peru, which is Lima, it's pronounced lima beans for some reason. I don't really know. There are different types of lima beans, but they're all for the most part generating from Peru. Okay. There's Northern American like butter beans. If you ever heard of a butter bean, if you ever been to Georgia, that's like a big thing in Georgia. That's considered another different type of legume, but scientifically it's the same as a lima bean. Okay, so again, lots of variety with the different like heirloom variations of it, but for the most part, they're that pod with the big green bean in it. Okay, kaiwa is a green fruit that grows on an herbaceous vine that has like a cucumber-like taste. Um, Kaiwa is commonly used as a vegetable, usually by removing these seeds on the inside because they're no good, and stuffing the fruit with like rice or meat and then roasting them. You'll see a lot of like stuffed peppers or vegetables that are roasted in Peruvian cuisine. Kaiwa is nutrient dense and is a good source of potassium, magnesium, and phosphorus. Again, these heirloom things that haven't been genetically modified and played with and messed with over time are pretty nutrient dense because they have not been processed. They have not been tinkered with. The seeds are heirloom variety seeds, so usually the nutrient content is quite high. Um, Again, another indigenous thing to Peru that we'll find in their cuisine. And then lastly, which is pretty important, is the chilies. Okay, there's a ton of different varieties of chilies found in Peru. You'll see them either sliced up and cooked, or they'll be stuffed. Or a big thing we'll see in South America are these pastes. Just like any other country that has a big chili culture, there'll be chili pastes. A lot of times you'll see like really vibrant yellow foods in South America, and usually that's because they have that ají. Okay, so the peppers are called ají. So there's a bunch of different types of peppers in Peru. We'll see the pastes a lot. We'll see them served whole, sliced up, roasted, whatever. But it's a big part of the cuisine. When the Spaniards came over to the Americas, this is one thing that they brought back from Peru to the old world, right? So that's where um, that trade started. And then you started seeing chilies all across the world that maybe originated from this part of the world, right? That's the how history affects how foods get transferred across the world. This is definitely something you'll find that has been grown and cultivated everywhere. All the different types of Peruvian chilies, just like their potatoes, just like all the corn in all the Americas, just like tomatoes, all those things were cultivated, found by the indigenous people, and then taken and traded when people came and colonized. That's kind of how it goes in food history. So the three big regions, right? The Pacific coast, the Andes, and the Amazon rainforest. So Peru has a large coastal area along the Pacific Ocean, the South Pacific Ocean, right? Therefore, seafood is an integral part of Peruvian cuisine. There are a lot of seafood dishes in Peruvian cuisine, but the most notable is ceviche. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, while ceviche and seafood dishes are really prevalent, there are also many meat based and potato based dishes that are popular as well. Based on where you are on Peru's long coast, which is basically the whole length of the country, local dishes can be affected by their specific food history, just like everywhere else in the world. Okay, so let's look at the big one. Ceviche, or also called ceviche, um, is a South American dish of marinated seafood, often served as a appetizer or a light meal. There are many variations of ceviche, each with their own type of seafood and flavoring ingredients, but the formula is usually the same. It's like raw, diced seafood that's marinated in some type of citrus juice. Okay, so the acidity from the citrus juice cooks um, the flesh of the fish to firm it up. Really, that's happening because of a scientific process called protein denaturization. They're denaturing the protein by acid, firming it up, giving it that cooked texture. Okay. Most commonly, ceviche in Peru is some type of white fleshed fish, like sea bass, with onions, lime juice, and chilies, and that's kind of what you see here. Maybe some herbs chopped up and sprinkled in there, but that's kind of the basic formula. Ceviche in Peru is normally served with their big starchy corn and boiled sweet potatoes. You're also seeing fried plantains here, like plantain chips, but um, the normal thing is like sweet potatoes and corn. Unlike ceviche from a place like Mexico or Ecuador, Peruvian ceviche does not have tomatoes usually. Traditionally, it's just onions, lime, chilies, and then maybe some herbs. Another part of the ceviche is leche de tigre. Okay, so tiger's milk is the citrus marinade that they made the ceviche with. So after the ceviche is served, you usually get a little bowl or cup of the juice, right? And it's usually just drank by itself, and it's somewhat like of a superstitious type thing where it's providing people with vitality. Um, it does taste good though. It's not like they're doing it and it's gross. It is like fishy citrus juice, but those things all go well together. It's a good flavor profile. So it usually is highly seasoned, quite sharp. Obviously has that seafood flavor, and is pretty refreshing. So leche de tigre. So now we're going to start seeing some of that influence from immigrants. Okay, so tiradito is a raw fish dish. Okay, just like ceviche is a raw fish dish, but this is influenced by the Japanese immigrants. So you can see the fish is sliced in the sashimi style. And unlike ceviche, it's not marinated. It gets a sauce right before it's served. So it still has that raw texture. Um, and it's not cooked by the sauce. It's really just flavored with it. Okay. There are many different sauces for this type of thing because this is a relatively new dish. Not like it's like not like it's made 10 years ago. It's a part of their history, but it's not something that has a strong tradition. So there's been a lot of playing with the flavor and changing the sauces over time. Um, but usually it is spicy. So when we see that bright yellow color, that should always make you think Peruvian chili paste, right? But also there's some that might have some soy sauce or something in there. It's uh, it's again influenced by Japanese immigrants. Like ceviche, tiradito is usually served with sweet potatoes and boiled corn. So we'll see the boiled corn right there. Traditionally, you might get a slice of sweet potato as well. And another popular dish in coastal cities is lomo saltado, and this is a really famous chifa style food in Peru, meaning that it's a Chinese Peruvian fusion. So in the mid 1800s, there was a large immigration of Chinese people to Peru because Peru's economy was flourishing and Chinese people came there to work. Also known as saltadito, lomo saltado is a stir-fried dish of marinated beef sirloin, commonly served with, believe it or not, French fries stirred in there and rice. The most common way to make this is by marinating the beef in vinegar and soy sauce and some spices, and then stir frying it with red onions, parsley, and tomatoes, and sometimes peppers. In Shifa style restaurants, lomo saltado will be cooked in a wok, although it can be cooked in a regular saute pan as well. But this is a really interesting thing that shows uh, the fusion over time based on the history of immigration of Chinese people to Peru. Okay, so moving on to the Andes Mountains, the traditional diet here is based on corn, potatoes, and other tubers, other potato type root vegetables. Um, Historically, and we're talking like long time ago, historically, meat came from Peruvian animals like alpaca or guinea pigs, right? But nowadays, there's imported livestock. So there's cattle, which is beef, there's sheep, which is lamb, and there's swine, which is pork. Those are all common. The main fish you're going to see here is like river trout. Um, so those are the meats. As with many rural cultures, right? Remember, the population density is not huge here. As with many rural cultures, most of the elaborate dishes were reserved for festivities, while the daily food was pretty simple. And we've seen that throughout all the cultures we've studied so far. Nowadays, some of those more fancy dishes are observed every day by people in urban areas, while the rural diets tend to be light on meat and heavy on grains and starches. Okay. So the first one is pachamanca, which is a distinctive Peruvian dish. It's cooked all over the Andes region, and it's made from a variety of meats, including pork and beef, herbs, and a variety of vegetables that are slowly cooked underground on a bed of heated stones. This is like a tedious process. It's a lot of different things. You're cooking a large amount of food, and the method in which you cook it takes time, right? So because of all the work that's put into it, it's normally only made for celebrations or festivals in the Andes. Um, Although in recent years, we have seen restaurants that specialize in serving this in areas outside of Lima, Peru. Okay, so some restaurants do serve this, but this is pretty much a an Andes mountain region celebratory kind of meal that's shared with a lot of people. Hearth cookery, right? Old school traditional ways of cooking. Heated stones are what's supplying the heat. You heat the stones in a fire, and then you bury the food and cover it with the stones. I'll try to find a video of this so we can see it. Oyuquito con charqui, okay, is another traditional Andean dish. The meat is based on oyuco, which is an important root vegetable to the Andes Mountains. So you'll see, like, again, there's lots of different varieties in it. It kind of looks like a potato. It's a tuber. It's another one of those root based starches. Um, the oyuco has an edible root, somewhat similar to a potato, and then it also has edible leaves that are similar to spinach. So the oyuco is stewed with charqui, which is basically alpaca jerky. The charqui is like dried and salted alpaca meat. So those two ingredients are finely diced and stewed together, usually with onions, garlic, Peruvian chilies, and spices. And when the stew is done, it's usually served with rice, sometimes potatoes as well. But there's already some of that starch in the stew. So that's a traditional Andes dish. And then rocoto relleno, okay, is a dish from the city of Arequipa, made with stuffed rocoto chilies. Okay, these are one of the really hot chilies of Peru. In this dish, the chilies are stuffed with spiced beef and pork, onions, olives, eggs, and then cooked in the oven with potatoes covered with cheese and milk. So you'll see the potatoes there. You'll see the stuffed chili there with some cheese. So it's usually served alongside potatoes that are cooked with cheese and milk, right? Similar to like a potato gratin, if we're talking about French food, right? Those are typical Andes things, right? More rural area using ingredients that are indigenous to what they have. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Amazon rainforest. So, a large portion of Peru on the eastern side, after you pass the Andes Mountain, is basically jungle, right? It's the Amazon rainforest. Amazonian cuisine of Peru is focused on indigenous ingredients of the area, as well as a lot of the river's native fish. Um, this fish has a lot of different names. It could be peixe. There's a different name in Brazilian that I can't remember. Um, One of my culinary school chefs, Chef Almir, brought it to culinary school, so we saw one of these straight from the Amazon rainforest. The scales on the fish are huge, and you have to like pull them off. It's like a dinosaur, basically. This is a really old thing that hasn't been changed in time. So like this is one of the really iconic fishes that you're going to find in the Amazon rainforest. But there's a ton of different types of fish, like even things like piranhas can be served. So they're going to use the native ingredients that they have along with whatever vegetables, aromatics, and fruits are there. There's a lot of fruits that grow in the Amazon rainforest. It has a great climate to grow things like plantains, bananas, and things that are from the other parts of the world, like mangoes and pineapple and stuff like that, has grows really well there. The popular cooking techniques for Peruvian food are to make either like soups or grilled with vegetable type things. Those are really popular indigenous techniques, usually using fire as a heat source. And again, fruits are a big thing that grow well here as well. But there's only two dishes that we're really going to talk about when it comes to Amazonian food. So Juane, which is one of the main dishes of the Peruvian jungle. It's widely consumed on June 24th, which is the feast of Saint John the Baptist, San Juan, right? Hence the name. So although there's like a few variations to this dish, it's usually made with rice, meat, olives, hard-boiled eggs, and spices, which is wrapped in a macaw flower leaf, right? These big leaves, um, and then they're put to boil for about an hour and a half. Okay. It can be the rice can be substituted with things like cassava or like a mixture of rice and cassava or beans or other starches, but usually it's rice on the inside, although again there's a regional variety. Um, Before being wrapped in the leaf, the juanes are bathed with a mixture of beaten eggs to kind of keep all the food together. You see how it's like nice and stuck together. The eggs help bind everything. The dish is usually accompanied by the customs of the people of each region of the forest. So, based on where you are, it could be having like cassavas on the side or boiled potatoes. Or sorry, boiled bananas. You'll see plantains there. Based on where you're at, the accompaniments that come with it are going to be different. Sometimes it's served with tacacho, which, if we look here, tacacho is a popular meal in the Peruvian Amazon that's usually served for breakfast. It's made by boiling or grilling plantains, or even frying the plantains, peeling them, and then mashing them in a large wooden mortar. When the plantains are mashed, they add things like lard, salt, and pieces of pork to it. So you'll see it's mashed plantains with all the little bits of whatever they put in there, usually lard, and some type of other fat to keep it together. And it's usually served with things like chorizo or meat or vegetables on the side, right? Um, this is similar to a lot of things based on a dish in Africa or West Africa called fufu, right? So this is similar to like the Puerto Rican mofongo, right? In the Caribbean and parts of South America with large African influences, you'll find this dish, which is directly related to fufu from West Africa. Sometimes the plantains will be smashed with garlic as well, based on the traditions of the place. But usually it's a pretty simple dish. Something that you'll find all across Latin America, South America, the Caribbean, just different variations of it. Okay, so we'll talk about all that on Monday, and I'll have some videos posted for you. But thanks for listening. Appreciate it.